Hi, I'm Tim Eskew.
And I'm Amanda Stradling. We are East Valley Leader Lab, and this is our podcast, Mind and Body at Work.
Wellness, well-being, and mindfulness are trending right now as organizations try to attract and retain the best talent in this tumultuous post-COVID world. At the Leader Lab, we agree these are important concepts and overdue for being fully utilized in the workplace.
We also believe that these concepts only work when you treat the mind and body as a whole. We are excited to be part of a societal shift in attention toward the whole person. We invite you to join us as we begin to look broadly and deeply at wellness, well-being, and mindfulness in the workplace.
Hello, my name is Tim Eskew. This is Amanda Stradling. We are East Valley Leader Lab, and this is our podcast, Mind and Body at Work. As always, if you can relate to the content you hear today, if it resonates with what you care about, please like, share, or subscribe to our YouTube page, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Today, we have what we think is another very unique, very interesting perspective on well-being and lots of other topics with our guest, Chris Cassilas. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Let me tell you a little bit about Chris. Chris Cassilas is founder of Regenerating Sonora, a Superior, Arizona-based nonprofit that's nurturing local potential for a resilient and regenerative future. He also helps build leaderful organizations as co-founder of the Development Dojo and is a board member at the Center for Shamanic Education and Exchange. Chris has a background in tech where he played a key role in helping scale a business from startup to becoming a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company. Very cool. So welcome, Chris, and I'll let Amanda get started into the conversation.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us about Regenerating Sonora, kind of the mission and purpose?
Yeah. So Regenerating Sonora is a 501c3 nonprofit. We're based out of Superior, Arizona. Superior, just some context, is a 3,000 person rural town. It's ex-mining town. The mine shut down in the early 80s, and it was like one of those boom and bust situations where things were great and they went bad real quick. And so there's still a lot of repercussions that we feel from that. And Regenerating Sonora was founded out of my own reckoning with what people are now calling either the meta crisis or the poly crisis. It's this idea that we have all kinds of existential issues that we face, whether it's environmental destruction, societal dysfunction. You take all these things and roll them up into one, and people use those kinds of names to talk about it, the meta crisis or the poly crisis. And I was thinking, I want to have kids one day, and I need to do something. I just felt this real strong call to do something about what I was seeing. And so there was about a year of just asking a bunch of questions and going down a bunch of different trails to understand what was the cause of the situation that we find ourselves in and what role I might play in it. And for me, I saw that community or at the neighborhood level, it's kind of the optimal container for the sort of work that I was feeling drawn to that could have the transformative effects that we need. And that's why I started the nonprofit. So I moved back to Superior, where I'm from. My family's been there for a long time. So my son is now 6 months old, and he's the sixth generation community member of our town. So yeah, a lot of roots there, and strong ties and connection and desire to help the town and by extension help the region and far beyond. It's called Regenerating Sonora, the Sonoran Desert, if you think about that as being like the larger or greater whole that we're nested in. And we'd like to see that we can have all life thriving in the Sonoran Desert. And so we're doing our part to work on that local neighborhood scale and share those learnings out with as many people as we can and see how that might have an effect.
That's really powerful work. And that's so neat that your son is the sixth generation. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize you were from Superior. That's so cool.
Can I ask a quick side question? Are there a lot of people in the community that are from there, or did all these people come in for the mining operation from somewhere else? And
So the to answer that question, it would always depend on how far we're going back, right?
okay.
Because what I mean is like, like my family came there over 100 years ago, like many families as we migrated from Mexico to be the miners. So some strong mining families. And there's a lot of folks who are still there from that time. And we have now about 60-ish% of the population is Hispanic, and almost all of them came specifically for the mine. You say that we're all migrants from there because before us was the O'odham, if you go back further, the Ohogam, the Apache, Salado, and others. So there's even us ourselves, even having that kind of a background is still not as much, but so many people would not find what I'm saying unique because, my family goes back 115. There's like different ways that we'd like to joke and talk about how far our families go back. So it's more commonplace than you might think.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I think my kids are 6th or maybe 7th generation here in Mesa.
Wow.
So my family is similar to this area.
Wow. Nice.
So that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's becomes more unique as time goes on, it seems.
Yeah, there's a lot more shuffling around. Not as much, not as deep of roots to a place anymore.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about. You talked about being called to this work and feeling like it really resonated with you. Can you talk about how your work really aligns with your purpose and your mission?
Sure. I have a strong desire to be a blessing. And as I've spent time contemplating what that means and what the implications are, it became really clear to me at some point that I'm going to be dead a lot longer than I'm going to be alive. So how can I be a helpful ancestor? And that became a big question. So in a way, the work that I'm doing now is a response to that question. How can I be a helpful ancestor?
How can I be a helpful ancestor? That is such a good question to ponder.
Yeah.
And you said you want to be a blessing. So say a little more about that, because that's not, it's a word I would use, but I wouldn't use it in that context.
Yeah. It's a funny one to think of, like, how do you define what being a blessing is? There's like a sense of helpfulness, a sense of upliftment, a sense of care. I draw from many wisdom traditions, but ones that I find myself coming back to a lot is the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And there they have this notion of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is like the Buddha mind, or it's like the will and the desire and the compassion for all beings to be happy and have the causes of happiness, for all beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And in a lot of ways, I can relate being a blessing back to that. And another one, too, is within the Greek tradition, there's this notion of phronesis. And that word gets translated to mindfulness, which I don't think is, it's not, I think it's a bad translation to use that word, but phronesis, they say, is in the Plato's Republic, is like, it's almost like the mother of all the virtues. And you say, well, what is it? It's the idea of getting wisdom and applying it into action. So it's almost like seeing how things could be more good and then acting upon that seeing so things are more good.
Interesting, because we use the term mindfulness some in our embodiment work because we're trying to help people get into their bodies. But we also think it's very important that it's not about just sitting in a room and getting out of your head and into your body, right? It's about, can you put that in action? And can you use it when you're in action? Can you use it to help yourself and create more value for yourself and others when you're in action?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, like that concept.
Yes.
I think that that's really at the root of leadership, when you're moving from a sense of care and your actions are aligned with that. I think that's a big part of how you make an impact as a leader, is that alignment from here moving out into action out here.
Yes. Yeah. There's another word from the Greek tradition, kednus or kednon, and it's will sometimes get translated to as taking care. And another way to look at it is to see what is dear and what is not, almost like you are to accept and what you are to reject. And so much of leadership is about that. What are we saying yes to? What are we saying no to? What are we saying yes, more of that, no, less of that? And that's at the core of it all.
Wonderful. Yeah. That's something I think our listeners can really take in, being intentional about, for my Tai Chi classes, what are you gathering? What are you dispersing?
Right.
Inhale, exhale. What are you taking in and letting go?
It's all right there.
Yeah. It goes back to breath even, right? Just so fundamental when you're doing it with that intent.
Yeah, we think about going back to breath or going back to the will. In some traditions, people will say God willed to be. And this notion of will being so primordial and fundamental to being. So when we talk about will, you can break will down and by what's yes and what's no. Inhale, exhale, same kind of pattern at play.
Awesome.
So what is Regenerating Sonora saying yes to? We want more of that. And what are you saying no to?
Well, part of our view is doing work that's place-based. And when we say place-based work, for us, that means almost like someone who cares for someone else would try to apprehend what's at the core of that person, what's at the essence of that person, and then doing what you can to help to bring that essence out more. So like we're having this conversation right now close to Christmas time. And so a lot of times when I think about a gift I might give, it's like I'm thinking about, well, what is this person? Who's this person really? And what's a gift that I can give that's going to enable them to bring out that essence more? Almost like an adornment. An adornment is something that you place on an object or on a person, and it has this sense of like amplifying the essential qualities versus an embellishment, which is like a thing that's not directly related to the core of that person, and you're putting it and kind of slapping it on top of that person. So we're saying no to embellishments. We're saying yes to adornments.
Awesome.
Nice metaphor.
Really enhancing what is good about the community and the place that you're in. Rather than just bringing in things that are maybe foreign to that don't integrate well with the strengths and the values that are already there, right?
Precisely, yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And we take this pretty far. Like we will look at before doing any work, and very early on when we began, we did this process of like a learning journey to say like, what are the patterns that we see across all the various contexts that we look at when we relate our view to Superior itself? So we'll say like, what's the geological structure telling us? What's the hydrological structure telling us? What about the flora and fauna and the pre-contact history and the post-contact history and current day? Where's the golden line through all those things? And that starts to give us a clue. And then we start to use what we see and learn from that as almost like our design constraints that we can work with and inspiration for the work that we might do.
Wow.
And who has joined you on this journey? So who makes up Regenerating Sonora? I presume you have fellow travelers.
Yeah, we have a wide range. And sometimes I'll look and realize like we have like 7-year-olds to 77-year-olds. So it's like a big mix. Wow. It's a multi-generational effort. And we have people from a lot of walks of life, but what I find to be really common, and this is just like a pattern of observation, is that we have a lot of veterans and a lot of women. And I'd say those are the key folks who are stepping up the most. But it's it is a broad group. But I see that it's like, you're also a veteran. Oh, hey, look, it's very interesting to see. Yeah. I think it's I can speak mainly to my thoughts on why veterans. It's that sense of a call for service, a duty to your country, and you can still play those things out, and you can still live into that calling in your own local area.
Yeah, their service in the military would have cultivated a real sense of care for their country and their sense of place, right? protecting their community and their country. And then, like you said, they get to continue that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's neat.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an example of, so you were on this learning process and you're really getting deep into what is it here that we want to adorn, not embellish? What are some examples of I guess activities that come out of that, or intentions that come out of that?
Yeah, well, one thing that we've seen with like a core pattern is like this enablement of diverse exchange that's always taken place. And you have to look at some of these things as metaphors to be able to cut across the context sometimes. So in this case, you have this enabling of diverse exchange that takes place amongst like people and the natural world around them, whether it's like kids like my tata, who's turns 98 next month. He tells these stories about him and all his friends jumping on the burros and like riding off into town, and they like named them all, and they'd be waiting for them after school, and like that's like one small, for instance, of the exchange that took place. Or even like when you see that before the copper mining took place and the silver and gold mining, there was obsidian mining by indigenous folks who were there. You find the copper, so you find obsidian from Superior like all throughout Arizona. So you have this exchange of the natural environment and the people. And then there were these pit houses that were situated in the entrance of Superior, to where people coming from the west and traveling east, they'd stop in Superior and do these tradings and exchanges. And so we asked the question like, well, how can... Oh, and one other thing I'll say is that Superior is situated right at the edge of the Sonoran Desert and in this transition zone. So you have this transition zone within Arizona that's like a strip or a strap that goes kind of like northwest to southeast. And it's this strip that has this huge elevation change in between them. And so we're at this transition zone for, again, this point of exchange. So we start to ask, well, how can we work with the way that our town is, or the way that our place is? How can we enable more exchange? And so we start to take that to all kinds of different places. Like one small exchange thing that we have is a free food stand. And it's a little stand, and anyone can put food. It's like permissionless. You put food there, and if you need food, you take it. And what that does is that actually enables even more exchange to take place. Because say, I'll give you one example. I saw that there was a family who was going to the food stand and taking some food. So I went and spoke with them, and they're Peruvian immigrants, and they had just come to our town. I didn't know at the time like how they came there, and but they were getting the food, and they were very grateful. And then 3 months later, it was just last week, I saw him over at the food stand again, except he was putting food in the food stand because he's been doing well enough here that he's got a little surplus. And so it's just like it's a small example, but it's a meaningful one at the same time of how this exchange takes place. And we could take this notion of how can we enable a diverse exchange? That means food, conversation, methods and processes, and the whole bit.
Stories, history.
Learnings. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very cool.
So what we're trying to do in this season of our broadcast is find as many diverse perspectives on well-being as we can. We sort of started from an organizational standpoint, you know, what creates well-being in organizations. But we had a few different guests, and, you know, we were getting very different ideas about what is well-being and how do they integrate it into their work. So just want to bring that up. Do you guys ever talk about the well-being of the community, the well-being of the people you're serving? Do you think of it that way? And you know, just elaborate on how that shows up for you.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that we're in preparation of doing like a community survey where we've started going door to door just to build relationships with folks that we don't already talk to. But eventually that'll be a community survey, and in talking with, you know, great minds from all around. One of these guys is like a visiting professor for MIT, and he was saying, you know, when we looked at the most effective questions to ask, just asking someone like how on a scale of 1 to 10, how thriving would they say that their life is? Like basically, how good's your life? You just ask that question, and that ends up being one of the most effective questions to really understand where people are at, and that's something that you can ask again later to see how things change. So we're considering doing something like that. It was the first thing that comes to mind. But yeah, we take a holistic approach as far as well-being is concerned. We have some mental models that we throw around a lot, like a multi-capital framework. So we'll say that, like, okay, any project that we're doing, we're trying to develop social capital, human capital, financial capital, natural capital, built and produced capital, cultural capital. And so you can see well-being through, as that's for instance of a lens that you could use to start to understand how a project or an endeavor can do all those things. And it becomes a lot easier for us to guide our thinking. Like, we have a community garden, and on one hand you think, okay, natural capital, pretty obvious. We're growing food, we're growing soil. But then you think about the human capital, because people are learning how food grows, where their food comes from, they're eating healthier. And social capital is an example of, like, we throw these full moon garden parties where we just have an excuse to get people together. We get our hands into the ground. The kids love that there's worms in there that they can find and pick out. So those are just some examples of how we look at well-being. And another one that I'll say is there's another framework that I find really helpful called the Vital Conditions for Health framework. And this is one that the federal government advanced after COVID. They were saying, how do we not go back to where we were, but how do we grow stronger from this? And that's kind of like an anti-fragility sense. How do we grow stronger from this? And that framework has 7 different conditions that they focus on as a way to see what health looks like for any community, whether it's a scale of our small 3,000 person town all the way to the whole government. And this is like one of these examples where I'm really glad and encouraged by what the government is doing in this sense, because there's like 45 federal agencies that have all agreed that this is a framework worth looking at. So maybe we can link to that in some notes or something so folks can see that, because when we started to map our programs to this, we could just see, wow, look, I can see how this just fits in really nicely. And it's worth looking at.
Do you want to elaborate on those 7 conditions? Yeah,
you have things like, let me first pause and evaluate on how I found those conditions. And it comes from that same visiting professor that I had mentioned before.
From MIT?
Yeah, well, he's a visiting professor there, and it's the Ripple Foundation that helped to develop and advance the framework. But after COVID, so during COVID, we had to go from being a community center, which we had, to being a meal distribution place, because schools shut down. We're a Title I low-income school, so we had free lunches. Free lunches and meals are no longer accessible because no one's going to school. So we, heard from our neighbors that was like a clear thing that we needed to do in order to fill that gap. So we did for 2 years. 10,000 meals later, we made sure it was fun, because one of our principles is like how we do things is as important as what it is that we're doing. So we made it fun and engaging, but then we started to see the demand began to wane. And for us, it's a good thing. It's like, it's like, we don't, it's a problem when we start to conflate measures and targets, then there's all kinds of reasons why that's a problem, or could be. But in this case, we're happy to see that less folks were coming and needing food. But then we'd ask them to roll down the window, and we'd say, hey, like, can you tell us, like, what are some other things that you need? What are some other issues that you're facing? And so they'd roll down the window, they'd tell us, and we had some of our kids who were helping, on a whiteboard, they start writing stuff down and tallying when they started to see some things. But after doing that for a while, what we found was they were looking for work. So employment was key.
Okay.
Stuff for the kids to do was really key. And if we could do those 2 things, they were all saying that would make a huge difference. So fast forward to a friend of mine, Mark Pearson, with Relocalized Creativity, another amazing, brilliant human, him and Carrie Turner, who've been helping us a lot to get some of the rigor behind systemic thinking and practices. They shared this study, and it was this guy, Bobby, the MIT person, who did this county study where it was said, let's try to find all the different interventions that counties have tried to do to support health and well-being in a place, to see what are the things that are going to make the biggest difference. So the big upshot from that study was meaningful work is key, and youth education is key. and and like belonging and social supports were key. And we had also heard that from people as well. So it was like this huge aha of like, we love when there's these examples of like this very grassroots, haphazard kind of way of getting information is in total lockstep alignment with, some rigorous study that was done to make these same determinations. So when these things agree, it's like, wow, okay, that's really important.
Yeah, validation.
Yeah. So some of the vital conditions, no surprise, would be they have one that's belonging and civic muscle, meaningful work and wealth, equitable housing, and the list goes on. But we found that those are some key areas for us that we're focused on, and it's just nice to see that there's some like external sources validating the things that we know are the right moves to make, and it just helps us to be able to talk to other people about it that way.
Right. And reinforces that you're heading down the right path.
That helps too. Yeah.
And I'm aware that you have a venue that you've sort of rehabilitated.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that's Leo's Community Development Center. And when I was talking before about the meal distribution that we were doing and everything, that was out of Leo's. So we started this off October of 2019 with like this real big event where we had sustainability experts from Europe come to talk about the circular economy. The creator of Repair Cafe, if you've heard of that, was there. It was a real fun time, and we're like, oh yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of this. And then bam, COVID hits, and it just changed everything. And so you made that pivot, and then once COVID started to lift, it wasn't until really like October of last year that we felt comfortable enough to start holding gatherings again. And so that was an old grocery store that I used to help my tata deliver milk to back in the day. He was the milkman after he lost his pinky in the mine. So he would take all his kids on milk runs, including me, which was really sweet. But anyway, that place had a special place in the community because like some other places, you could do everything off credit. So like I'd show up there and then Raimundo would say, "You want to put that on Tata's bill?" And I'd have like a candy bar in my hand and be like, "Yeah." And so then he just write it down and put it on Tata's bill. And, that was how everyone works that way. There's all that, so much trust in the community. Everyone knew everybody. And so that was enough to just simply write down who bought what, and then they'd pay when they could, or pay at the end of a pay period or something. And so when we rehabilitated the place, that meant finally getting AC in the unit, which
really, it didn't have AC before.
No, and like I don't know how it was that we were able to get through those summers, because it was hotter inside the building than outside. Thankfully, the Marley Foundation supported us with a grant just this year to be able to finally get AC in there. And that was a huge win, because it gets cold as well in the winter, but those summers especially are pretty brutal. So now we have the free food stand that's located there. We have a free clothing rack there as well. A youth tech club that is like kind of the heart and soul of the building and the work that we do. We do monthly open mics. Right now, we're also focusing a lot on workshops around sustainability and self-sufficiency, as well as workshops that help us to get to know our place better. So like just recently last week, we had the Arizona Water Company come just to talk about where does your water come from, as a for instance of how we can learn more about our place. So we have a lot going on there, and the future of what we'll be doing is working with this idea of a resilience hub. And so these resilience hubs are popping up all around the country. Flagstaff was just awarded $1 million to do 3 resilience hubs in their area.
Really?
And it's this idea that like we have, more climate issues that we're going to be faced with in the future. We're all more aware of disruptions like supply chain issues, electrical grid issues that can come. And so having already existing community centers that are already trusted within the neighborhood to be these places that can continue to operate when a disaster happens, and then to be able to support the recovery afterwards is something that we're having to do by necessity now.
Yes.
And we're working with another community group in Kearney, which is a neighboring town of ours, as well as Miami. These are 2 existing community centers that we're working on starting to have a network of these community centers / resilience hubs throughout the region that we call the Copper Corridor, which is a handful, a little over 10 communities with something like 20-ish thousand people population-wise.
Okay. Yeah.
All in that same geographical
In that
area.
same region, yeah. Yeah, and for us, Superior, Copper Corridor, and then the Sonoran Desert. And so we're playing with those scales.
Nice.
That's fantastic.
So you wear a variety of hats, and we're gonna move on from Regenerating Sonora. We can always come back to it. Any other aspect of that you wanted to share before we move on? A couple other things.
Thanks for asking. I think we're good for now.
Okay.
Great. So we're going to shift. This is a part that I really like to dive into with each of our guests. I want to know about what personal practices they are using to work on their own well-being. Because you're talking about those scales, right? I firmly believe that the leader, that scale starts with themselves and leading their own life and their own well-being. Then that ripples out to their family and community and their organizations. And can you talk about some of your personal practices for well-being?
Yeah, definitely. And the Adawa Medewen, they say that it's self, family, community in that order, and for good reason. So when I look at well-being, I'll invoke the good old Tibetans again, because they have this way of talking about it sometimes where they'll say, happy mind, healthy body, wealthy life. And so I hold those three pillars front of mind for me because there's different practices associated with each. So like for a healthy body, let's say, admittedly, I should make a premise that says like I have a 6-month-old son and like my diligent, consistent practices are way less diligent and way less consistent at the moment. Still working on like stabilizing what like normal life looks like for me. We'll see how that goes.
Yes.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. So the only consistent practice that I can say happens no matter what is the morning routine with my son. And that includes us going outside, greeting all the animals and the trees and the mountains and everything that's there, and then going out to our medicine wheel to pray. And that's praying for everything, for everyone. And we have a certain way that we go about doing that, and that includes a lot of gratitude as well. And so that's more of, I guess we could say, the happy mind category of meditation practice as well, Vipassana meditation. And on the healthy body side, that's the one that I'd say is currently being neglected more than I'd like. I can still intermittent fast, which is great because that's pretty easy to do, is just do less things, right?
Yeah, so, instead of more things.
Right, exactly. So that makes it easy. And with that, it's like a sensible diet, sunlight, sleep, and thank God I have a very supporting wife, and we've been able to figure out the sleep thing enough to function well enough, you know?
Good.
And then on the wealthy life side, I look at that more holistically and think about like, okay, meaningful work, yes, and I'm definitely doing that. And then also just like the rich social connections that I have. And that's a big part of how I look at like the wealth of my life is like, who do I spend time with and what's the quality of those connections? And so I ensure to make time for the people in my life that I can physically see, and making phone calls to the people that I can't.
I think those connections are so important. And sometimes modern life makes us undervalue them a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Because we have this to-do list that we sometimes prioritize over connection. Mm-hmm. And I think that's to our detriment because the connections really enrich our life. That's where so much growth and learning happens. And it is a huge measure of health and well-being. Yeah. And I know that's an area that I'm working on incorporating more because as a Tai Chi instructor, you know, I'm got the body part, right? I have spiritual practices and I have a lot of meaningful work that I do. And then what about, you know, that as it ripples out, am I taking time to connect with others and be present? So I think that's so important.
Yeah, and it's easier for me to see the value in my elders, especially because it's like I don't know how much time I have left with them, you know.
Yeah.
So like my grandfather that I mentioned earlier, he turns 98 next month.
Wow.
I have Francisco's great tío or uncle is still with us, and so I call him once a week and spend that quality time with those who it's like more obvious that I don't have as much time with. But like a good friend of mine passed away 3 years ago, and he's my age, and you just never know, So it's one thing to say it's easy and obvious to spend time with our elders, but who knows?
A lot of things can get in the way if you let it.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not mindful of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So you talked in your introduction, we talked a little bit about how you started a startup company, and what were some ways that you maintained well-being in that environment?
Yeah, so that was when I had just turned 21 years old. I was working for the folks who made GoToMeeting, which was like the Zoom before Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I was with them, and then they asked me to come with them to the startup that they got started. And so I was an early employee there, moved to Santa Barbara, California. And, being a 21-year-old, well-being for me, I had like two sides of it. One was like I was being like really irresponsible and just like going out and having fun and whatever. And then there was the other part of me that was like really interested in all the biohacking stuff that was starting to emerge right around that time. And so I've experimented with like a million different diets, different kinds of supplements. And so I just did a lot of experimentation during that time to find what worked for me. I really like that N of 1 concept where it's like it can work for 97% of the people, and it kind of doesn't matter. You need to know if it's going to work for you. And so for me, I did a lot of that experimentation to find, okay, I know what things I can stick with. I know what things work for me. I know what things make me feel good. And that was at the time kind of combating against the favors I wasn't doing for myself by like all the partying, whatever. And then at 28 years old, I just like had this interesting idea of like, what would happen if I just stopped drinking for 2 weeks? It was like a question. And then someone asked me, they're like, so how long are you not drinking for? And I said, a month. And it just like came out of my mouth. I'm like, well, I guess I'm not drinking for a month. And then someone asked me, how long are you not drinking for? A year?
Oh, wow.
I'm like, well, I guess I'm not drinking for a year. And yeah, that really totally changed like how I spent my time, what my life looked like really, because so much was centered around like going out with my friends and doing that whole thing. And I moved into this huge like introspective mode. And so that time that you're referring to was in my 20s from 21 to 30. And so that was a big experimentation time. And towards the end, this like move into strong introspection. And that's when like my interest in spirituality started to really extend.
That's neat.
Yeah.
I would say it sounds like you integrated a lot of the things that you were experimenting at that time and applied them more deeply in more ways in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the experimentation because we find in personal development, not everybody needs the same thing, right? So part of what we're always focusing on is helping people apply what it is we're teaching around what it is they want to change, what it is they're not satisfied with. And then you got to test it. You start small, and the things that seem to be working, you can build a practice around it. The things that are not, you haven't lost much by testing it out.
100%.
Yeah, test it is a big part of our philosophy. Even our name, The Leader Lab, you experiment in the laboratory, and your body is your laboratory, your work, your life is your laboratory.
Yes.
And you test it.
Love it. 100%. There's a lot of value in that.
Yep. But as you get results, then you start integrating that more deeply into your own well-being and who you are, really. Yeah, very cool.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the Development Dojo.
Yeah. So during that time that I mentioned when I was working at that company in my 20s to 30, fast forward to when I was 28 years old, I was the director of business development, leading multiple teams. And it's a lot of young, talented, ambitious people with a lot of the will, and we could teach the functional skills of the job, but it was clear to me that there was still a lot being left on the table. And there was more work that we needed to do, but it was less on the here's how you do the job and more on the here's how to approach the work. Here's how to show up. And that's where the big lever's at, or at least that's a major lever. And that started the dojo, as we called it, and was something that we led our teams through, where we would take different topics that had this like paradigmatic shift to them. It could be like the classic like growth mindset versus fixed mindset, or looking at imposter syndrome, or like dysfunctional heuristics, aka like cognitive biases and things like that. And just starting to look at these different aspects of ourselves that have cascading effects throughout all these other parts of our lives. And sometimes we talk about meta skills. Like a meta skill is like the skill that's going to help you with all the other skills, and it's even going to help you to build more skills, period. And things like self-awareness, things like self-management.
Yes.
These are skills that are going to help you everywhere. And that had such a huge impact on the organization, because all of a sudden our language is starting to change. We're having different conversations with each other, and then people are able to regulate and manage themselves more effectively, to bring out more of themselves. And what we heard over and over again was, wow, this is helping me inside and outside of the office. And you probably know that like the vast majority of like millennials and younger places in the workplace, they say that if they don't have an organization that's invested in them personally, that they're not invested in the organization. So, right. Those statistics weren't, and that idea wasn't why we did it, but it certainly helps to know that we're addressing some real issues that younger people especially are finding in the workplace, that they need to know how this is related to their bigger purpose in life. And that's something that we would talk about a lot around experimentation, of like, this is a way, especially in a results-driven kind of organization like we had, was this is going to tell you, are you getting the results or are you not? And if you're not, then what else can you try? And so that became a good feedback mechanism, kind of a lagging indicator, right? The lagging indicator is like, are your numbers going up? Are you hitting your goals or not? And then the leading indicators are you building new habits? Do you have practices that you're sticking with? Are you able to catch yourself telling yourself an unhelpful story in the moment, as like for instances? And so that was all just going so well. I ended up leaving the organization, like I said, in 2018, when I had this strong call to do something else with my life. But there was a lot of passion, and especially because of the value that we were seeing from the people as people, not just as teammates,
Yeah.
And so the successor that I put in place when I left, he ran the organization for a little while. Then after a few years, he left, and the two of us decided, hey, let's do this as its own business, because clearly there's merit here. And so that's a little bit about the Development Dojo.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's, we discover, well, some of it was design, some of it was discover, but at the Leader Lab, some of the people that come through, most of them are working in organizations, but some of them are really working on things more in their personal life. Some of them come in very focused on what they're going to do in their business life. And, we say you can focus on leading your team, you can focus on leading your life. These same lessons apply, and you'll probably see benefits in both. Yep. It's really
right.
A twofer. I love twofers.
Yeah. Those are always good when you get the stacking benefits, because I'm still the same person, whether I'm in the context of like talking to myself or talking with my wife or talking with a teammate. I mean, there's some level of context that's different because of the relationship, but I'm still me. So, that means that I can work on me to then work more effectively in all these different domains that I find myself in, these different relationships that I have. Yeah,
nice. So how do you, in your Development Dojo business, how do you find clients, or how do they find you? How does that work?
Well, we'll see how it changes in the future, but right now it's all word of mouth and people that we know. And, we've so many of the people that we've worked with who've experienced the dojo have gone on to lead company or lead departments at companies. And so that's been like probably our biggest referral source at this
Yeah.
time. It's just people that we know. That can only take you so far at some point,
Yeah.
but for now it's, it's where we're at.
Good. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun because we do everything in like a dialogical process, so it's individual development, it's leadership development, and it's team development. So we're all coming together to have these conversations, and then the teams are breaking out and having conversations about the topics at hand. So they're getting to know each other better. They're building trust amongst themselves. And then we include an embodiment challenge that goes with that. And that's something like, okay, these are good concepts, but now if you don't have a keystone habit, then work on building a keystone habit for yourself. If you already have a keystone habit, then work on stacking another habit on top of that, like as a, for instance, for something that people can try for themselves, and then they iterate it to a point where they can actually complete the challenge. So, and then that becomes a touch point for them to talk with their peers about how are you going with the challenge.
Yeah, so much growth happens in conversations like that. I think conversation is such a necessary ingredient for our personal development.
Oh, yeah.
And goals. Those goals that you're talking about.
And the journey along the way of how do we get from not being there to struggling to, setbacks and pushing through them.
Yep.
So much in those lessons around goals.
Some accountability within the group.
Yeah. And internal accountability versus external accountability, and what are the norms that we're going to use to say it's okay to have an accountability conversation, and the different modes and ways that those can be. So yeah, there's all kinds just in that. What are your aims or your whys behind the goals, right? Yeah, and then the habits that you think are going to help you get there, and are they helping you get there or not? So yeah, that's a real big topic.
Awesome.
And is the dojo place-based, or how do you
that's
service your clients?
Based. It's all team based. So we do everything on Zoom.
Okay, so you can do it virtually.
We're not in person. Yeah.
And
but
still,
the team is like the unit.
Right. Okay. And you're helping them engage their bodies through you can coach them virtually on these embodiment.
Yeah, and for us, the embodiment
exercises.
challenge is like go out and do it. Like go out and try it. Go out and experiment with it.
So it's kind of field work.
Yeah, more field work, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. But you need your body for field work.
Absolutely.
So look at the time.
Yes, we should. This has been such a great conversation.
Yeah, it's going really fast.
But we are nearing the end of our time. Is there any last thoughts you want to share?
So how much editing are we doing? None?
I feel like it's flowed pretty well. It'll go.
Okay.
Only if needed.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Because one question you asked was about embodiment or how the body or well-being is related to leadership, I think was one of the questions. And I guess what I'll say there around how do our bodies come into play with leadership, and how does well-being come into play with leadership? I think it's worth mentioning that there's this 25-cent word, epistemology. And epistemology is like the ways that we know something. And there's multiple ways of knowing that are worth taking into account, because each way of knowing has its own bounded applicability. It works for some things, doesn't work for other things. And so to first understand that, and to see that I have different ways that I can know something. I have like my own like discursive like way that I can like logically come to a conclusion. That's one way to know a thing, and that's really good for certain things. But sometimes when you don't have all the information, or you're just dealing with another kind of situation or different context, you can't always use that logical discursive mode. So having other modes and understanding that it's completely justified and valid to have other ways of knowing, like what you can hear from your body. I'll give you like a funny example that I've learned to grow and trust, that when I'm scheduling something with someone, let's say scheduling an appointment for a week from now,
Okay.
it's like my body will know, it's not a good time. You should do that other time instead. And I used to not listen to that. And then it's like every time I'm like, I should have listened to myself, because I knew when I was scheduling it that I didn't feel right about it. But like, okay, like my logical discursive self doesn't know the future. Like that's not information I have. And I don't even really care to try to investigate how it is that I can have this feeling about, oh, that's not a good time. I just know it works and I trust it and I follow it now. So I found that, and then I can kind of have that hindsight of like, oh, wow, I'm glad I listened, because had I have scheduled it at this time, I would have this other conflict of a thing that I didn't even know was going to be a conflict at the time. So it's just like an example of how we can use our bodies to help us in marshal in and employ these other ways of knowing. And that also applies to like when you're making judgment calls in the field, let's say. Like I remember when we had Lakin, she's 19, and she wanted to change the blinds out right before an event that we're having. And like my body just don't do it. But we take a very laissez-faire, try to say yes to everything. And I like went against that. I said, okay, sure. Well, she went up there, the rod fell on her, she got hurt, the curtain, like this thing, the rod mounting broke off, and like, we still don't have curtains on there anymore, and so it's just like, how could you know? So like there's something about normalizing when you say yes or no, especially no, wait, and normalizing like, I just don't feel good about it. So having language around like, just not getting the right vibe about this can be a way that as we're working with our teams that we can start to like understand and respect that this is another way to know too. And if there's like a real controversial thing, that we can just have a deeper conversation about it. Instead of just saying, oh, you said no because you don't feel like it, fine. But when you have trust with your team, then when you say something like that, it is heard. It is heard, and it's appreciated. And especially when we can go back and talk about these moments with the benefit of hindsight as a way to get to the point that it can be more normalized to say, yeah, this just doesn't feel like it's the right thing. And that's okay to make that the reason.
So this habit that you've created of listening to your body, checking in with yourself, has, through conversations and practice, it's rippled out into a culture within your organization of validating the wisdom that comes from our bodies and this other way of knowing.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah. Like this time, one of our high school students, he was like, I can do a penetration test on the router to see if it's going to be safe or not. And I'm just like, no, I don't think so. He goes, well, why not? I go, I just don't feel right about it. He goes, okay. And that was fine.
He accepted it.
And that was fine. Yes. Yeah.
That's a valid answer in your organization.
And I can't know what the future is going to hold for why that's going to cause some weird backdoor vulnerability. Like, who knows? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's fine to not know,
Yeah.
It's harder to explain those other ways of knowing, but, there is more and more data, more and more evidence being pulled together around, the different aspects of our nervous system, right? So that logical part in our central nervous system, our culture thinks that's the greatest, but what we tend to do is not put enough value on how does that center in our gut? We don't know exactly how it works, but we know there's as many nerve cells in the gut as there are in the brain.
Neurons in the gut?
Yeah, it's like the second largest grouping of neurons in the gut. And then there's another huge grouping in the heart. So these are, and they know a lot about how these things function, and it's different from the logical, so it's harder to explain. But we disregard them at our peril. And your examples were great.
Well, it's there's sometimes I'll talk about there's the propositional ways that we can know something, and there's the non-propositional ways that we can know something. So if the way that we know from our epistemology is coming from a place that is not rooted in language, you, by definition, can't give a reason. Like, you can't give a reason other than citing the feelings. You can't give a proposition for it because it's non-propositional.
Yeah.
And I guess if there's something to end with or to leave the talk with, it's to appreciate the non-propositional. I'm a big propositional fan. You can get into like all the various philosophers that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. I'm a big fan of that for sure. But I found in my own practical application of what I can know and learn and understand that there's some stuff that I totally can't understand, and it's helpful to listen, to recognize, and appreciate that too.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, I think we should close out. Thank you so much for being here, Chris, for sharing your wisdom with us, and just being present with us today.
Yeah. Thank you very much. If anyone wants to learn more about what we're doing, regeneratingsonora.org and thedevelopmentdojo.com. And also YouTube, if you just type in Regenerating Sonora, that's probably one of the best ways to see like what's fresh and updated, and you'll get to like see a picture of a glimpse of like what it actually looks like in the field on the ground. So this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. I hope our listeners will take time to check out those sites. And thank you so much, listeners, for being here. This has been Mind and Body at Work with the East Valley Leader Lab. Check out our leadership courses at evleaderlab.com. And like we said at the beginning, if this content resonates with you and your cares, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Be well and keep moving.